Fig fam, welcome. Figs and coffee. It got down to 23 last night, and that means your fig tree goes dormant when it's that cold. And I want to talk about what a fig tree does when it's dormant, and ultimately what that means for pruning, cutting propagation, etc. Because I have my fig cutting sale coming up in a few weeks, and maybe even sooner now that we had this week-long stint of freezes here in Wilmington, North Carolina, Zone 8B. Now, I think it's important to note that this is abnormally cold for this time of year, but it does get that cold here nonetheless. And nonetheless, in Zone 8B here in Wilmington, North Carolina, I think the coldest it generally gets, it'll drop just below 20. But we see 20s before. But I want to show you something. Check it out. All my fig trees are dormant. Normally people get freaked out when they see the leaves like this time of year, or when the figs cells have ruptured because they can't handle freezes. But I am truthfully excited because that means I get to go into the next phase, my winter phase of Phil's figs. And that means propagation, and that means growing more fig trees, and that means all the back end work where I've taken care of these fig trees all growing season. Now I get to do the stuff that helps me prepare for next season when I don't have a lot growing in the garden outside of maybe some of my winter garden bed varieties. And so I'm really I've taken some downtime, and I hope you guys did too. And now I'm ready to jump into the beginning of 2025. And I want to show you what I look for before I harvest cuttings. So this freeze is really important for me, especially for fig trees, because this gets their sap flow to slow down or even stop in a lot of their extremities of their branches, while still the branch being viable for propagating or growing next spring. Let me show you. So check it out. My Paradiso fig, after going down to 23 degrees, we've had a week of freezing temperatures at night with a few nights hovering just above freezing. And you can see all the leaves that have now froze, their cells ruptured, and the sap flow has definitely stopped going to those extremities. Figs that are actively growing cannot handle any sort of freezing temperatures. In fact, this is like a big issue for a lot of border growing zone climates where you're in zones 6B, 7A, 6A. They can survive some of those really cold winter temperatures while they're dormant. But it's when they get the sap flow in the spring and you have a late freeze that they can't. It's those late winter, early spring days in those colder regions where you may have some warmer temps, some longer days of sunlight where they may wake up and their sap will start flowing. They can even push out new growth, and then a late freeze happens, and that's when it injures them, where they have dieback, where they even can die completely. But the late fall, they're actually slowing down. They understand the growth cycle throughout the growing season, especially after they're established after a few years. So if you're putting a 2 or 3 year old tree in the ground, they will pick it up quickly, especially in the fall when they start getting less light, cooler temperatures, and they start slowing down. They may still have sap flow, and you can still harvest cuttings with sap flow. The upside is you can harvest a fig cutting any time of year. You can even propagate green cuttings. The downside is they are less resilient. When they are fully lignified, when they have an established bark, when they're brown, and when their sap flow is done, it's actually an amazing time to take fig cuttings. So you see, this is 1 year old growth. You can see that's still brown. Older fig tree growth tends to turn gray when it's established, a good trunk. And what I want to show you here, if you can see this leaf, it's been frozen, it's dried out, there's no moisture in it. If you look at the tip of the bud, you can actually see that this was unlignified growth. And what happens is that the cells in this piece of plant growth do not have the right chemicals to help it stay above freezing. It's just more or less water in there. And what happens when it freezes is that the water molecule expands, because water actually expands when it goes to a liquid to a solid to form the molecular structure of ice, and it ruptures the cell wall of plants. And it can rupture what's inside the cell as well. When you have lignified growth, they actually have more chemical compounds that make it resilient to that type of rupturing and keeping the water in those cells from exploding. That's the really scientific biological way of looking at it. So basically, when it freezes, the green growth, the cells rupture. When you have lignified growth and that growth slows down, it feels the cold temperatures, there's sap flow that runs up and down this bark layer that's getting established, that lignified space, and even in the green space. And so what happens is when it starts to get cold, that sap flow gets reduced and it actually works its way all the way back down to the trunk. So even if I were to score the trunk here, it still has little to no sap flow. So if it was the middle of the summer, you would actually see a lot of sap flowing out through these cuts I was making, the scoring that I'm making. Going back to this branch, this is what I really want to show you. And this is how I do a test to see if my tree is truly dormant, because they will lose their leaves. But if I take this and I score the bark, and it's got to break that cambium layer, that lignified space. Oh, whoops. Well, now I have a cutting. And what I want to show you is there's little to no sap flow here. The good news is that if I peel it, you can see that it still has a bright green cambium layer where those rooting hormones lie. Or you can take it up to the node here, and those are your lenticles. So what I would actually do for preservation is I could almost prune above this green growth, because if I were to cut where that green growth is, you can see the brown where the rot is. And that's just a little bit of dieback because I had some late season growth. I will wrap this in parafilm to keep the moisture in, but I have these buds here on lignified wood that are ready to grow. And this is a short cutting, but it's wide and it has lignified wood. So it has sustained, protected energy in here that I can make a whole new fig tree with this cutting. When you're pruning like this, you do want to still cut at that 45-degree angle. And what I'm going to do, and what's kind of nice when you're pruning your fig trees, is that if I cut it at a 45-degree angle here, it almost lines up with the pattern of the bud growth on the branch. So you can see how they jut out at angles. You can almost follow that angle when you're pruning your fig tree for cuttings. I had cut this down to the ground 2 years ago. So this is only 2-year-old growth. And you can see how much it's expanded over those 2 years. It's incredible. And what I'm going to do is, these are my 3 isolated scaffolding branches. And off of there, I'm going to find 3 secondary branches, which is probably going to start here. And each one of those, I'll have 3 tertiary branches. If I find that the tertiary branches aren't really growing healthily, if they're kind of spindly, I'll cut them back to 1 or 2 nodes above this base, or I will find the healthy secondary branch and I'll prune it. But what I really wanted to cover is how resilient things are. In fact, there may still be some sap flow, but really not much at all. And I really wanted to highlight, when you have cuttings like this that are lignified, that are dormant, you can store these for 6 months in the fridge. In fact, when you buy cuttings from me, I wrap the tips in parafilm and it locks in moisture, and I saran wrap them. And then I recommend to you is you put it in your crisper drawer just to keep the humidity down on those cuttings. And you could wait until April to even start rooting them. You could do it March, April, whatever is best suited for your growing conditions, whether it's in your house, in your garden, whether you're in a cool climate, warm climate, or if you have a greenhouse. And so this is my number one favorite time to prune my fig trees is after a really cold period where the sap flow stops. And I find where the lignified wood is and I go from there, because it makes it easier for me, and I want to share how it makes it easier for everyone else. So it kind of helps hedge my bets in helping you guys have a successful rooting experience. Not to say you can't root a fig tree under different conditions. You can root a fig tree in just about any condition, but some are easier to root than others. So if you have lignified wood that's dormant, that stores well, it'll root up quite easily for you in comparison to like green growth or not really fully lignified or still awake growth that needs warmer temperatures or that won't store as long for you because it was dependent on that sap flow for nutrients in a growing cycle, where this is not in a growing cycle, it's in a dormant cycle. Beginner growers, fig trees are deciduous. They like to go dormant. They like to have a sleep period. The only exceptions are ones that I've rooted later in the year that I want to push through one growing season, and they actually don't even grow that well. So let me show you examples of what a freeze can do to fig growth that is not lignified yet. Here is a small but very easy example of fig that is not lignified yet, that was exposed to a hard freeze. And I have, this is my Triano Calabrese. It's one of my best potted figs. It makes huge, beautiful honey figs. If you go back, you can look at it. And it sprouted a bunch of suckers in the past few months this fall. And what I think I had done was I prematurely defoliated the tree. And when we had a few more months of warm weather, it said, hey, I'm not actually dormant. And I woke up and sprouted more fig growth. That being said, I did not harvest these suckers. I was hopeful that maybe they would lignify in time, but they didn't because this cold weather came a little early. And even if it did come at a normal time where we experience our first freeze, maybe a few weeks from now, it probably wouldn't have made it in time. It started to lignify down here, but it's still very much green up here. And you can already see the shriveling that's occurring. And that's just from not being lignified, from being new plant growth. If you look really closely, you can already see these smaller baby ones shriveling. So right here, you can see how small this is, but you can see that unlignified growth has already shriveled up and it's on its way out. But green growth will not survive. Those cells will rupture. So check this out. Say you have a tree that's more established, had a second round of growth, but put out new growth and then it froze. It doesn't mean your tree's not going to make it for the winter. In fact, it'll probably adjust, right? So this Italian 258 had a whole second round of growth, and I really wanted to see how it was going to behave during this cold freeze, because the idea that I could keep it protected in a greenhouse or protected in my garage, I was worried that it wasn't actually going to go dormant. It was just going to accept it as cooler temperatures and keep growing. But I want it as a mother tree to get onto the growth cycle of all my in-ground trees and all my other fig trees. So I let it get exposed to 23 degrees. And you can see the results, right? Fortunately, the growth that it had was short-lived. And so I have all this growth here, 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 and here. Wow, that's satisfying to grab. Unlignified green growth and leaf growth and possible figlets were frozen back. And I am okay with that because it's the fall where the tree was actually slowing its growth profile. And with the easing of cooler temperatures and less light, understood it was kind of getting dormant, but it was on the fence. And so what I did with this freeze is I let it fully accept that it's going dormant this winter, and I'm letting that sap flow go all the way back to its main trunk and into the root system, where it'll stay and remain dormant for the winter. Zooming in, you can see a little bit, I can't tell if it's a spider or just spider mites, but you can see this unlignified growth right here. You see that? You see the shriveling on these leaves? That could actually damage it more, but if we come out here, you can see where it's shriveling, the cells ruptured, the cells died. And if you want it to kind of heal nicely, rather than ripping it off like I did here, if I see this shriveling, it may heal itself on that shrivel, or I may prune it myself and I'll put some like IV Organics 3-1 plant guard on it, because it'll help trap in the moisture, and trapping the moisture will actually help it trap in the heat as well. The rest of this tree is quite lignified, so I'm not too worried about it. But if you were really, really worried about your fig tree, if it had a lot of new growth, then I would consider moving it inside, because say it was just all a 1-year-old tree that was all still green, this tall, and it hit 23 degrees, it could kill it. But generally, if you have anything older than a year with some lignified growth, that'll be resilient during these freezes. But just for reference, they are deciduous. They do like a cold period. They just don't like a super cold location. They cannot survive that cold where you're dropping below that. I've seen hardy Chicagos go down in the single digits, but really, depending on the variety, you don't want to go below that 15-degree marker outside. And that's why people do things like wrapping their fig tree, which you can totally do. You can insulate it to keep it above that threshold, if you will. Here in Wilmington, North Carolina, zone 8B, the coldest it gets is 15 degrees through the data collection that it uses to determine zone 8B. Generally, I can keep my fig trees in containers outside all year round, and I've proven that over the past 5 years. Many of these trees have already gone completely dormant, and they decided, like this Col de Dame Blanc. That makes me really happy because I don't have to do any sort of babysitting or pruning in case it gets burned by a hard freeze. It's already decided that it's going to go dormant for the winter, and if you see the buds and they still look green, that's okay. They're still protected underneath, and they will almost turn brown on some of these buds over the course of the winter. And if you really, really wanted to nerd out and find out what's going on under there, there's still some green growth, but those terminal buds are designed to handle the freeze once it's lignified around that branch. And in the springtime, the first sign outside of kind of scoring the bark and seeing sap flow is you'll see these buds start to swell. Here's a great example of what I'm talking about. You can see right here. Oh, come on, give me this focus. Right here, you can really see the bud changing color, and it's really settling into that dormant phase. You can see how it's almost brown. If you were to peel that away, you could see the green layer underneath. That looks a little more like this. You see this right here, and you can see how it's a little more green because it's still kind of settling in the dormancy, where you have something here that's a little more brown and hardened off. And not a true harden off like you would have bark, but something that would stay on and protect the bud underneath for springtime. Pretty cool, huh? So looking at this LSU champagne, it tried to make a third crop of figs, or a second main crop, and it didn't quite get there. They froze, and figs that freeze can't survive. And so you can see they look squishy, but they fall off the tree quite easily, and they're still very, very much underripe. So if I pull it apart, oh, you can see how dry they are and spongy because they never ripened. But once they freeze, the figs get aborted very quickly, I have an idea, and I had to do this before they froze, but you can pickle unripe figs. And I've heard about this recipe, I've read about this recipe, and I didn't get a chance to do it because life got in the way. You can see this is the exception where this green growth did not freeze or die back, but I would like to remind everyone that exceptions prove the rule, correct? So if we see exceptions to what we're talking about, that generally proves that the rules of rupturing of green growth cells, non-surviving or dieback of unlignified growth will in fact die back during really cold periods. But you can see here that even on smaller branches, whether it was a microclimate, whether it was just the sun hitting it while it was frozen for just a little less than the rest of the space, that it survived. But it's just a blessing that you can count. As a whole, let's see, these figs have dropped as well, and their cells have ruptured, and it's just part of the dormancy process. But as a whole, I really enjoy this time of year because I've already accepted that the growing season's over. I'm not trying to stretch or push any sort of fig ripening now. I am just leaning into what is my next chapter, and that's my fig cuttings, propagation, sales, and helping people grow their own fig trees and have something fun to do over the winter and have something that will blossom for them in the spring and turn into a fruit tree for them even by next fall, because fig trees are known to fruit on their first year of growth. But I get to start my fig cutting season, and that's really cool. I'm going to launch all my fig cuttings on philsfigs.com. You guys can access the store on Instagram. You can find the link here on YouTube. You can see the link on Facebook as well. And you guys can reach out to me directly with any questions. I have a fig propagation guide on philsfigs.com that you can download for free. If you order fig cuttings from me, I include it with the order. I want to know feedback if it's helpful for you. Anyone who's ordered fig cuttings from me in the past, speak to it in the comments. I want to know if it was helpful for you guys, what you're looking for in propagating fig trees. If you're new to it, please watch my fig cutting videos from last year, but I'm going to revamp them come December, January when I start propagating. And I'll show you my space real quick of what I'm propagating in just a few weeks, because I myself have held off from propagating until these figs got truly dormant, because I propagate in stages and I need them to stay preserved in the drawers of my fridge for long amounts of time. Before we go to the greenhouse, I want to remind everyone that figs can be dormant outside in containers, not as cold as temperatures as in-ground fig trees, because their root ball is exposed. So if you're really dropping below that 20 marker, that's when you want to move a fig tree that's dormant into an unheated space that's attached to your house, so you have some thermal radiant heat, but nothing that would be indoors. If you are tight on space, say you just have a patio and you have a condo and your fig tree is dormant in a container and it gets below that 20-degree marker, you're welcome to move it into your kitchen for a few days. It's not going to hurt it. It's when you keep it in a 65 to 70 degree room for weeks to a month, that's when it's going to swell and think it's spring and wake up again. But if you just have a small gardening space where you need to keep it in a container, staying above 20 degrees is your marker before you want to bring it in somewhere just to protect it from ultra cold weather. Otherwise, if you're above that 20-degree marker, they can stay in containers outside. There are exceptions to this. If you get nervous and you want to keep it above 25, that's fine. I went down to 22 last night and I'm running with what I have here because I have such limited space. But I also love where I live here in Wilmington, North Carolina. I'm right near the coast. If it does get cold, it does it for a short amount of time before it gets back up to milder temperatures. So we're not in prolonged cold periods. And I've lived in the Northeast, I've lived in the South, and you just have to find what's right for your climate. But as a general rule of thumb, 20 degrees is my threshold for container figs, and 10 degrees is my threshold for in-ground trees. That is in true winter. When it starts getting longer days, March is a whole different story, and I want to talk about it when we get there. All right? step into my greenhouse. All right. Close the door here to keep it warm. Because I'm an avid gardener and I started this plant nursery, I am constantly pushing the limits of what is capable in a garden because it's fun. And I understand that like not everyone has these spaces, and it took me years to kind of create this space, but I love it. I want to share it with all of you, and so I hope you guys get to grow with me as I do it, because I have things like plumeria, I have tamarillo, I have other plumeria, I have banana puffs that I wanted to survive through the winter and let them grow for the spring. This is my propagation station. The 3 things I have in my greenhouse that I haven't started propagating yet, but I just kind of started laying out my trays. But the 3 things I have in my greenhouse are my space heater. I have, and it's 60 degrees right here in here, guys. In the daytime, I can get upwards of 35 degree differential from the outside temperature. At nighttime, I'm looking at that 15 to 20 with certain things put in place, including my greenhouse space heater. It's Palma BioGreen. I can put a link in the bottom. If you have a greenhouse, it works great. It's reliable for years, plural. I just need something that can always be there for me. And it accommodates, I think I have 120 square feet of space in here because it's a 10 by 12. And it can fit that space. That's its maximum. And I think it might even be a little less. But the other things I have is it's not on a cement platform. It is on gravel that is straight into the ground. So I get radiant heat. And then I have heat mats. The heat mats are set to 78, but in cooler temperatures, I will bring them up to 80 because that heat will start to dissipate right at the surface level. I have a water jug back here that's in a pickle barrel, and it's black, so it absorbs heat and releases radiant heat as well. And then I have to make sure everything is sealed up here. And then I actually am going to put something really cool on here, guys. I'm excited to show you, where I'll even get a bigger differential in the winter, but it can be shed in the summer in an easy manner. But this is where I'm going to be doing my propagations. As you can see, I haven't propagated anything yet. I am waiting to get started, but I have a few weeks yet, guys, and I want to get you guys cuttings as well. So I hope you appreciate this video. Reach out with questions like we talked about before. I really appreciate you guys joining me on this fig journey. Like, subscribe. Talk to you soon. Let's talk figs and propagation for the coming year. Have a happy holidays. Take care, fig fam.